Hello and welcome to the newest webinar in our Radiation Safety and Wellness webinar series, Synchrotron Radiation Protection, the Canadian Light Source. We will be speaking with Grant Cubbon, Health, Safety, and Environmental Department Manager at the facility. Grant has worked in radiation protection at the Canadian Light Source since 2003. He was a radiation protection specialist there for 10 years before taking on his current role. Before this, he was a Laboratory Technician and Supervisor at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada's National Laboratory. He was also a Director at the Canadian Radiation Protection Association from 2016 to 2022. The Canadian Light Source describes itself as one of the largest science projects in Canada's history, producing the brightest light in the country. Since it started operation in 2005, it has been used by over 4,000 scientists to advance science in the areas of health, agriculture, energy, the environment, and advanced materials. It is listed with the International Atomic Energy Agency as one of only 64 electron synchrotrons and storage rings associated with light sources in the world, and the only in Canada. The final 20 minutes of today's webinar will be a movement break led by Charmaine Wong of Jihong Tai Chi and Qigong in Richmond Hill, Ontario. This school is part of the Jihong Tai Chi College, which was founded in 1988 and is a large organization with campuses located primarily in Canada, China, and a few other locations. The schools are all dedicated to teaching the art of Tai Chi with decades worth of accumulated experience and research to define and design a modern and advanced set of teaching methods. Let's take a moment to go over the functionality of the Zoom meeting. We ask that during the presentation portion that the audio and video be from the presenters only. We have found that although you can access the audio through the computer or telephone, the quality of sound tends to be better when listening from a computer. Please use the chat feature for any discussions and post questions arriving from the content in the Q&A. This will help us to find your questions for the allotted Q&A portion while allowing people to have a conversation in the chat. As the webinar is only 40 minutes in length and is immediately followed by our wellness session, time may not permit for us to answer them all during the webinar. The answers will be posted on our website along with a link to the video recording and a copy of the slides. This can be found under Education Webinars. I will be sending a confirmation of attendance email after the webinar and will include a link to the page with that communication. I will also include the topics covered and the length of time spent in the webinar, as some people have requested this to send to their professional association. Lastly, I have automatic closed captioning enabled in the slide presentation. If they are being blocked by your Zoom controls, you should be able to select a different way to view the webinar in Zoom, which makes them easier to see. Today, we'll be discussing radiation protection at the Canadian Light Source, Canada's only synchrotron facility. The webinar will consist of a presentation of background concepts regarding the production of electromagnetic photons and their interaction with matter, ionizing radiation, and regulation of electromagnetic radiation in Canada, followed by an interview with Grant, which will include information about the Canadian Light Source, its radiation hazards, and radiation protection at the unique facility. After the interview, there will be opportunity for those in attendance to ask questions as time permits. Energy is the ability to change matter in specific ways. Radiation is energy traveling out from a source. Radiation can be in the form of particles, as in alpha or beta particles, or waves, such as sound. Electromagnetic radiation is an oscillation or wave in the electromagnetic field. These waves can travel through empty space. Experiments show that electromagnetic radiation has properties of both waves and particles. This is called wave-particle duality and is not yet fully understood. So electromagnetic radiation can also be considered as a stream of massless, uncharged particles of pure energy called photons. Electromagnetic waves or photons can be produced in a few different ways. 3 of these ways will be explained briefly. When electrons are bound to an atom, they are found in orbitals around the nucleus. Each orbital has an amount of energy associated with it, and only a certain number of electrons are allowed in each orbital. Orbitals fill up in a certain order, from lowest energy states to higher. If an electron in a higher energy orbital has the opportunity to drop to a lower energy orbital, it will do so, and the excess energy will be carried away as a photon. Radioactive nuclei emit alpha particles or beta particles in an attempt to become stable. If there is an excess of energy in a nucleus after this emission, releasing a gamma photon is one way the nucleus might get rid of it. Photons are created when charged particles are slowed down or change direction. Radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays are all the different types of electromagnetic radiation. As the wavelength of an electromagnetic wave gets shorter, its frequency gets higher. As well, the associated photon energy goes up as the wavelength gets shorter. Note that gamma and X-ray photon energies overlap, but how they are produced differ. Gamma is a result of there being excess energy after a nuclear decay. X-rays come from fast-moving electrons slowing down or changing direction. When an electromagnetic wave encounters a material, a few different things might happen. Like all waves, they could be transmitted or pass through the material. They could reflect or bounce off the material. They could refract or bend as they pass by the material, or they could be absorbed. What is most likely to happen depends on the photon energy. When photons are absorbed, they could heat the material, which means that it makes the atoms or molecules move around more. It could give enough energy for the material for chemical reactions to happen that would not happen otherwise. These are called photochemical effects. With very high energy photons, ionization can occur. With extremely high energy photons, pair production or activation can occur. An ion is a charged particle. Ionizing radiation has enough energy to remove electrons from atoms, resulting in a pair of charged particles, the ejected electron and a positively charged atom or molecule. Because of its ability to damage DNA, ionizing radiation is carcinogenic. The forms of electromagnetic radiation which are able to ionize atoms are some ultraviolet, all X-rays, and all gamma. Although there are a few materials which can be ionized at lower energies, it's generally accepted that ionization can happen with photon energies greater than 10 electron volts. This is part of the ultraviolet range, plus all X-ray and gamma. These photons ionize atoms by interacting with electrons and giving up all or some of their energy through the photoelectric effect and Compton scattering. With photons of energies greater than 1 million electron volts, or a mega electron volt, something called pair production can happen. This is in the very energetic X-ray or gamma range. The energy of the photon can be turned into an electron and its antimatter equivalent, a positron. It has to happen near a nucleus for momentum to be conserved. The ejected electron can cause ionization, and the positron will interact with a nearby electron and be converted into two high-energy photons. Activation is the process of a stable material becoming radioactive due to it being exposed to radiation. This is not the same as something becoming radioactive because it gets contaminated with material that's already radioactive. It can happen with neutron radiation and with extremely high energy X-ray or gamma. For this to happen with photons, their energy has to be at or above 2.2 MeV. The process of the photon activation results in ionizing radiation. In Canada, the jurisdiction for the regulation of electromagnetic radiation works as follows. If it is non-ionizing, the regulation of the equipment built to emit radiation for purchase, lease, import, or manufacture is under the Radiation Emitting Devices Act under the Federal Ministry of Health. As it is being set up and once in use, non-ionizing equipment is regulated by the province or territory in which it is being used, unless it is a federally regulated workplace. In this case, its setup and use will fall under the Canada Labour Code. Gamma sources, for the most part, are regulated under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. For X-ray, the regulations vary by whether or not the equipment has the ability to generate photons higher than 1 mega electron volt. If they do, they are regulated by the CNSC. If they do not, they are regulated the same as the devices which emit non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. This concludes our background presentation intended to give context for our interview. During the interview, please post any questions to the Q&A. If you do not have that option available, please post in the chat with a request for us to move it to the Q&A. I'm pleased now to welcome today's interview guest, Grant. Thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you to the Canadian Light Source for providing us with images to share during the interview. Just a note that the pictures do not necessarily match the question being asked. We just wanted to include as many images as possible. So Grant, we'll get your audio and video going.
Okay, I should be on there now. Thanks very much, Lynn.
All right, thanks, Grant. It's nice to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. So Grant, what is the light source?
Well, in simple terms, I'd say the light source is exactly that. It's a very powerful source of bright light. Gets used for science, and it's a very powerful tool.
And how does it work?
Well, in a nutshell, we generate an electron beam at our electron gun and accelerate that to 220 MeV at a LINAC. That's 2 stories underground. That gets transferred up to our booster ring, which adds more energy to the pulse, brings it up to 2.9 GeV. And then that pulse is transferred to the storage ring and allowed to circulate in that ring. So that process happens, can happen once per second. And then while the electrons are circulating in the ring, they every time they change direction, as you mentioned, they give off this wonderful stuff called synchrotron light.
So, and it's magnetic fields that are used to change the direction of the electrons when they're going around?
That's right. We have 24 bending magnets separated into 12 cells, basically. So set of a couple bending magnets and some other magnets for focusing and defocusing the beam. And yeah, we use the magnetic energy to keep the electrons in the circulating path. And then we also have something called a superconducting cavity that provides radio frequency, because as you might imagine, every time you bend the electron, it loses a little bit of energy, it would slowly spiral inwards. So you need to add that energy back every time it does a lap around the ring. And
that's what makes it a synchrotron rather than just a ordinary particle accelerator.
That's right. Yeah. For us, we go to great lengths to keep the beam circulating in the ring and not hit things with it. So that changes our dynamic quite a bit from traditional particle accelerators.
All right. So what is the synchrotron light used for? Well,
synchrotron light is used to probe matter. I think just about any discipline in science can use the bright light. It's about 1 million times brighter than the sun. So it's very small in what we deal with. We're talking about photon flux per square millimeter, something around 10 to the 18, 10 to the 20 in that range, depending on the beam line. And the sample size then, of course, are quite small as well. Typically, they'll be in the order of a few milligrams. Essentially, you shine the light on that, and you can absorb light and tell things about the constituent matter. You can scatter the light and then use a fancy detector to put that back together and give you an image or some information on the structure.
And in terms of when you're saying light, is it all visible light, or what frequencies are we talking about?
Well, we have everything from the infrared region through visible light, ultraviolet light, to up to as high as a few tens of keV. Typically, what we get, what we call a high energy X-ray at our facility, would be something around 100 keV. Would be quite high for us.
Okay, thanks. What's the biggest radiation hazard?
I'd say there's 2, I guess, in a broad sense. One is the electron beam itself, which, as you might imagine, 2.9 gig of electron volts is a fairly hot electron. So we're very careful about making sure people aren't inside those areas when the beam is on. And then some of the synchrotron light, of course, because the energy is quite low and the flux is very high, that can be quite dangerous just from the potential dose if someone was again trapped or left inside of a beamline area. So,
all right. Now, because there are these radiation hazards in certain areas of the building, what considerations must be taken when running the light source?
Yeah, in terms of running the synchrotron, We very much have a defense in depth with respect to our radiation safety program. So considerable effort goes in at the design level very early on. You have to think about how much radiation you produce from various scenarios and design your shielding accordingly. So we have thick concrete and lead. Then we also have systems designed to keep people out when the beam is on. If somebody tries to enter, it'll shut the beam off automatically. And if they're somehow, heaven forbid, got left inside, they would have a way to shut the beam off very quickly. So those are our main parts of the radiation protection.
So it's distance of our time, distance, and shielding.
Sure, all that applies. Yeah. Time, distance, shielding, yeah, LR
Yeah.
principles as well. But
Yeah,
at a high level, that's our main concerns is keeping
keep
people and
people.
the radiation sources separate.
Yeah, so use the shielding and stay away from it. So again, how do you ensure that nobody's in that hazard zone?
So we have a process, as I say, a system designed. We call it an access control and interlock system, which essentially parses out the areas with physical gates that close. And then on those gates will be limit switches, position indicators. We use a dual redundant system that gives us a hardwire relay chain as well as a programmable logic controller chain. Both of those will feed back to the radiation sources, and the logic of the design will tell us whether or not we can turn the beam on. So essentially, when we want to turn the beam on, for instance, in the accelerator areas, it's broken up into large zones. We have something called a Kurt key system. So each one of those zones gets searched. There's a path that you're forced to walk through. You have to push on a light switch that turns on a light at each step along the way. And then that leads you through a path to make sure you search all areas. And then you exit and close the door behind you. When you leave the zone, you turn the key, you take that Kurt key with you. That goes back to the control room. So, excuse me, we have 9 keys total that would lock up or 9 zones rather, that lock up the entire accelerator facility. So if we wanted to operate just the LINAC, we'd have the 5 keys that run that would have to be turned. And there'd be another minute of a horn sounding in the area that was just locked up, and lights would flash, of course. And after that, then we'd be permitted, operations staff would be permitted to turn things on.
So how often is a process like that done? Like, just, is this a daily thing, or is it run for like a longer period of time?
So we typically operate in with two outages during the year, 2 main ones. So otherwise we operate 24/7. So everything's going smoothly. We lock up at the start of a run, which will last a few months and don't typically have to unlock again. Although on Mondays we do have maintenance days where sometimes we have to access the area. So anytime you access the area, you're required to complete the lockup procedure once again.
Okay. How are synchrotron safety considerations different than that for nuclear?
I'd say probably the biggest and simplest one is that if we decide we have a radiation problem we don't like, we can turn the power off and it goes away. Unfortunately, can't say the same thing about a nuclear power plant. So for us, it's like I say, we have defense in depth. So we have several monitoring systems, and some of that feeds back to the control room, of course. And simply turning the beam off is the most effective way to eliminate the hazard till we understand what the problem is.
What dose levels do you see outside the risk zone?
Virtually nothing. We have a pretty extensive area monitoring program. That is, we have about 500 dosimeters around the building in various locations, including outside, and our we have very sensitive dosimeters on the outside designed for environmental measurements. And our design is such that a worker, say a lawn care type of person, could spend up to 2 weeks in close proximity to the facility, and we have to keep them under a 50 microsievert annual dose, which is basically nothing. So yeah, so we measure that carefully, and yeah, we find our dosimeters come back, we're well within that.
What shielding is built into the facility?
Well, as I said, the shielding design is very important at the start. So we end up with bulk shielding, as we call it. So I think part of that is the 2 stories underground. You end up with concrete and then quite a bit of earth and between where people are, where the occupied areas are. Then the storage ring and booster ring areas, we have anywhere from 2 to 3 feet thick concrete walls, depending on the location. And then we also add lead in some areas if we find there's a problem. During our commissioning testing, we've added some local shielding in that way. And then we have the beamline enclosures, which are largely built of lead walls with a steel skin on the outside.
What types of monitoring systems are in place in terms of monitoring dose or anything else?
So we have several, like I say, defense in depth is very important. So we have an active area monitoring system. So there's about 32 sites around the facility that contain an ion probe and a neutron monitor. So that feeds back to the control room, and those cumulative dose levels anyway will turn particularly the injection off, which is the bulk of our risk. During stored beam, there's virtually the radiation levels are non-existent outside the concrete walls. But so we have an active area monitoring system. As I mentioned, we have similar personal dosimeters hung on the wall in various locations. So we monitor that quarterly. After every extended shutdown period, we do handheld monitoring around the facility, around the accelerator areas, especially if things have changed. If we've done some maintenance or some improvements, we'll verify that we're still within our safety envelope for radiation. And then we also we do an annual radiation survey of our beamline enclosures. And yeah, that's the bulk of our radiation program that keeps things, helps make sure we keep those ALARA.
So what type of maintenance? You said a couple of times that things get shut down for maintenance. What type of maintenance are done on systems this big?
This is quite a bit of routine work that has to happen. A lot of it's related back to the building, to air changes, to water changes. We circulate a lot of water to cool things because we're running a lot of high voltage to run the magnets, of course. So those systems all require some maintenance to keep them operating. The synchrotron itself will need periodic maintenance just to align things. It's very sensitive to the alignment. If you think of a synchrotron beam being created in the storage ring, it has to travel many tens, sometimes even a couple of hundred feet to get to its target. So any slight variation in the alignment of the equipment that's steering the beam will, of course, make our scientists very angry when the beam gets there because it's not hitting the spot they expect it to. So it's very, very precision oriented. So a lot of work like that, and just a lot of routine kinds of things, upgrades, and yeah, different types of maintenance that way.
Are all your workers nuclear energy workers? And does everyone need dosimetry?
No, we initially, when the synchrotron was built, there was we were pretty confident on everything, but we weren't sure what we were going to see on the experimental floor. So we took a cautious approach and monitored everyone on the facility. But over the past, I'd say roughly a decade, we've started removing certain groups. So for instance, you see a couple of our scientists there, they wouldn't be required to wear a dosimeter where they're working on the experimental hall, experimental floor areas. The risk of radiation is very low. We've never had anyone exceed the public limit at CLS, nuclear energy worker or otherwise. But we do have some staff where there is perhaps a risk, in part because we do have a class 2 medical isotope production facility, another electron accelerator that's separate. So those same workers are involved in that. And then in part because there is a small risk of activation, and just want to make sure we're not surprised by anything. And then in part because things gives us some confidence if we know the personal radiation dose to folks is being kept ALARA helps gives us some confidence in our radiation protection program.
Yeah. Precautionary principle, right?
There you go.
So you had mentioned activation. So do you need to monitor for activation?
Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, we have a hot electron beam that certainly is capable of activating material. The synchrotron light itself, as I said, is in the tens to low hundreds of keV. So risk of activation of that is zero, essentially.
Yeah.
We can get some high energy photons above that in those areas, but the power it's just so low that we don't see any activation on anything they would come in contact with. So we do monitor the at the end of every shutdown. Before we have a long maintenance shutdown, we'll monitor the entire accelerator. So someone will basically walk the accelerator and check for residual radiation. So we do that a couple times a year, just to make sure there's no surprises again. But essentially, there's very low risk of activation at the facility.
So that is the completion of the formal interview. So we'll now take questions from the participants from the Q&A. And as time permits, we'll then we'll just continue the conversation and people can ask directly. So let me just check and see if I don't see that anybody's posted any questions in the Q&A. But does anyone, so we'll just go right on to, does anyone have any questions? You can speak out, or you can type in the chat or the Q&A to ask Grant about the Canadian Light Source or about the radiation protection program there. I don't know if we have any lively people. Sometimes we get a good conversation, sometimes not so. People are quiet. So if nobody's hopping up, whoops, sorry. I didn't mean to go ahead. I was just wondering, Grant, well, we'll wait to see. Oh, we got a question here now. Then I get to ask my own. What are the emergency, do you have nuclear emergency plans for the synchrotron, and are you allowed to share some of the information around what would happen in an emergency?
Sure, sure, yes. We have a nuclear emergency plans, which in terms of a power plant, I'd say it's really nothing like that. So our in terms of if we had an issue with our facility, for instance, a fire or something like that, we have a building evacuation process that we test annually and work with our staff on site to make sure they all know how to leave the building. As far as first responders, I think the main thing is making sure they understand the hazards and risks. So we have toured all of our, for instance, pretty much every fire department in Saskatoon has come to our facility at some point, and we continue ongoing engagement with protective services outside the facility. But in any regards, we're just another industrial facility. Our hazard from radiation from a nuclear emergency perspective is very low. We don't keep a lot of high-level sources on site or anything like that. And for the most part, it's pretty conventional here.
And you can always shut the power off, right?
Well, that's right. That's right.
So, and then the next one is wondering what dosimetry service you use.
Sure. Yeah, we use Landauer right now.
All right. So is there anything else people would like to comment on, or let me just see. Oh, we have those two. I was just wondering in terms, this what I was thinking of last night is thinking about a question that's not formally there, but in terms of having that mega electron volt and giga electron volt energy source, is that just into your regular power grid, or how does that work?
I'd say yes. We have our own connection of I think it's 220,000 volts of power. We have a separate line that comes from Sask Power, but
Right.
it's otherwise pretty conventional. We have some switchgear, of course. It's power is very sensitive, so the power coming in the building runs through, it's converted to what we need through pretty sophisticated equipment. I'd say electrical equipment, but basically we just get a big amount of power that supplied to the facility to allow us to operate.
And I don't know, oh, here we go, are you able to share what you think is the most interesting use of the light that has occurred? Also, what is the process for a researcher from an external facility to gain access to the light source for use for research?
Well, that's a very good question. I think maybe it's my background. It actually wasn't at this at our synchrotron, although that's one of the uranium mines in northern Saskatchewan do quite a bit of work with us, and they were in fact able to differentiate the oxidation state of arsenic in their tailings management facility. So by that I mean different levels of arsenic have different levels of mobility, and so how you build your tailing management facility is very important to make sure you contain things. So based on the synchrotron research, they were able to identify the isotope and thereby construct their facility using that research. So that was one application I found very interesting from a very small molecular level or atomic level almost view all the way up to a large project that involved many hundreds of millions of dollars. So
Yeah, and then how do researchers, do you know how you researchers get access to be able to use the synchrotron?
sure, we have twice a year we do what's called a call for proposals. So at that point we basically have a cutoff date, so researchers will submit a proposal. They tell us what they want to do, so that gets vetted for feasibility, for relevance, and then we of course review those for safety as well and make sure we can do them on our beamline and do them safely. So once it goes through that process, then there's an allocation process by which the top ranked experiments or proposals are given beam time over a 2-year period. And then once the researcher themselves wishes to come to the facility, they have a training process they go through that they have to complete. But once that's all done, they get access to our building, and then they're given some training on the beam line and can carry on with their proposal or experiment.
Great. And a question that came in is, why was Saskatoon chosen as the location for the facility?
That's an interesting question.
It is an interesting story. So
I'd say there's a number of reasons. Some of them, I mean, because I've been here a while, I've heard lots of stories about all this, but I think in a nutshell, the Saskatchewan Accelerator had been here since the 60s. So there was a bit of a brain trust, so to speak, some expertise anyway in running an accelerator of this nature back in the 80s and 90s, and also recognition that that facility was either going to need a pretty big influx of money to bring it up to modern standards or change. And so I think at the time, the director of the facility went to great effort to engage some local folks on how the synchrotron could be built here and what would be required, what they could do. Then they also went forward with getting Canada convinced it needed a synchrotron. So there is quite a bit of a synchrotron community in Canada. In fact, our light source, as part of a Canadian program, has a beam line in Chicago at a place called the Advanced Photon Source. So there's a lot of folks around that wanted one, and the timing was right, I guess. The government seemed to think they have the money. We had some infrastructure here. It knocked down the cost by about 20% or so, I'd say. And by having the existing Linacs, they're able to use that electron gun and linear accelerator to generate the beam. So that combined with, I guess, a couple of other things. One, we actually had a Liberal federal member of parliament, MLA, in this riding. At the time, Jean Chrétien's Liberals were in power. So how much that played into it, I can only speculate, but it was something that gets noticed from time to time. So part of it was budget, part of it was the expertise here of folks that were here, and the Canadian desire to build one and get it done. So
that's great. So this is probably one or two more questions, and then we'll spend our time. But here's one: there's any radiation protection from from everyone before entering the synchrotron, like Ganil in France and Soleil, and like HZB in Germany. So are there, so Johnny, if you don't mind clarifying, you're asking if people have to fill out a radiation protection form of some sort?
I think
yeah.
if I'm understanding it right, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure what you mean by a form. I know, for instance, I guess perhaps I understand better. I mean, we have folks who travel all the time, so some facilities will ask us for a record of their dosimetry, and so yeah, if they're fussier about this, I guess I'll say, because we're not giving folks lots of dose. We don't consider them nuclear energy workers, so we haven't expressly required dose history of folks who come on our site.
All right, great. A couple more have come in. I have a radiation protection project in my institute and would like to have the input and advice from someone in the radiation protection group at the Canadian Light Source. Is it possible to get in contact with someone to discuss? Are you okay with me giving out, or do you want to give out some contact information?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss any collaborations that might be possible.
So you can always, Simone, I'll give you the Institute's contact is on the next slide. If you email me and make that request, I'll forward it on to Grant. Do any of your proposals involve experimenters requiring a dosimeter? If so, are there procedures that the university organization needs to provide before they use a beam like at CERN?
So in a nutshell, no, we haven't had proposals that are beamlines or dosimeters required. We do have limited amounts of radioactive material that is used, often it's exemption quantity or just marginally above. So the dose rates coming off those are extremely low. So nope, we don't require, haven't had to at this point require external users to wear dosimetry.
All right, well, that's great. We have a few more minutes before we're done. If anybody else has any questions, or I was just going to, one thing when we were first looking at this, and one thing that we haven't mentioned, and it sounds like you know all aspects of this, so if you don't know the answer, I'm sorry throwing this out. But how is this different than a cyclotron?
I guess the synchrotron goes to great lengths not to hit things with the beam. So we're strictly in the business of circulating our electron beam, producing light, and using that light for science. Cyclotron, of course, would want to hit things with their beam and use that to make new products and different types of experiments depending on the facility.
Yeah, like it just seemed like there's a lot more cyclotrons than there are synchrotrons.
Sure, I think it's simply because you can make useful medical isotopes with cyclotrons. So,
right. All right. So are there any last questions before? Oh, one last one. Here we go. Do you have to work with the local electrical utility closely when you power up? Have there ever been any issues with the power cutting out?
not that I'm aware of. I think, yeah, that's a good question. No, I think basically we flick the switch and the power comes on magically, just like at home, and we have beam circulating.
Knock on wood, Grant.
Yeah, knock on wood. It's yeah, and generally, like I say, we have our own separate lines. So that my understanding is our draw, although it's large, is designed into their system, and as far as I know, we don't have to give them any notification before we turn things on.
All right. Well, is there anything, Grant, you'd like to share with the audience, like just in terms of radiation protection or working at the synchrotron, things like that, before we wrap up for the day?
Well, I guess just want to say thanks, first of all, for inviting me. I find this all very interesting. Gets me to think about things, interact with folks from outside our facility and outside our somewhat limited world. In terms of radiation protection, I'd say synchrotrons are pretty specialized, and a lot of effort goes into the design, and then the maintenance of it all is somewhat routine. And as I manage the health and safety group here, so that's radiation protection is a part of that, but also very important, of course, are things like electrical safety and lifting with our overhead crane and things like that as well. So our risks, I say, from a radiation perspective, are well controlled here, and thanks to one of my radiation protection lead are very well managed as well. That
Yeah.
group.
Yeah. So just one last question that came out. If a researcher was coming from another country, should they come there with their own national dosimeter or no? Would that be more up to their own policies than yours?
Yeah, it's not something we require. I know when our regulator comes to visit, they will bring their own dosimeters because they're curious about whether what we're telling them is accurate or not. So, and they have a responsibility to their staff. We do have available electronic personal dosimeters as well. So we have supplied those to some folks on request if they have some special concerns or depending on what's going on in the facility. But typically, no, we have no requirement for someone to bring their own dosimeter.
So Grant, I'd really like to thank you for coming today. I think that this is a really great Canadian facility that I don't know that a lot of people think about that much, right? So hopefully this brings a little bit more awareness, especially out there in the research community, you know, that there's a lot of projects that do happen, but maybe, you know, people are so innovative and creative, they may come up with new ways or new uses for it as well.
Well,
so, okay, sorry.
I was going to say, well, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I find the synchrotron is quite a well-guarded secret that I'm always a bit, I don't know, surprised, disappointed, whatever you want to call it, when I go to conferences in Canada, especially, and find often that people haven't heard there's a synchrotron in Canada. But I think it's more of a testament that the synchrotron's focus is more on conventional science as opposed to it being on radiation protection. And
Yes,
it's very specialized in terms of radiation protection. And our place is a dynamic environment. It's fascinating. There's lots of cool things going on all the time, but it's typically outside the realm of radiation protection and more so in conventional or just regular science.
and when I send out the information to everyone, which will be later in the week once the video is processed and up on YouTube, I'll include links to your website, because the website has a wonderful tour of the facility, an interactive tour that you can go through and learn even more about how it works and what's done there. So
yeah, that's right. There's basically a tour you can walk along and actually see the inside of the facility. There's also a lot of wonderful information on there that gives a very plain language view of the synchrotron. That's very helpful.
So thank you. So we hope everyone that's here that you found the webinar on radiation protection, the Canadian light source, informative. If any questions about any radiation safety topic, please feel free to contact us at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. We have a toll-free information service to support questions from employers, workers, and the public with respect to both ionizing and non-ionizing radiation safety. We also provide consulting services for those who might need support in developing a radiation protection program and related services, including radiation surveys. If you have any further questions about ionizing or non-ionizing radiation, contact us toll-free at 1-800-263-5803 or by email at info@radiationsafety.ca. You can also visit us on the web at radiationsafety.ca or find us on Facebook. Once again, we'd like to thank our guest, Grant Cubbon, for sharing his expertise. And thank you to everyone who took the time to join us today. We'll now move to our 20-minute wellness break in the form of beginner Tai Chi, led by Charmaine Wong of Jian Tai Chi and Qigong in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Welcome, Charmaine.
All right. Okay. All right. So thank you for having me back here again. So what I plan to do today is to continue to practice those movements that we learned from before. And we're going to learn one additional movement, which is a really simple one. If you remember, last time we talked quite a bit about the fundamental principles of Tai Chi. So while we're practicing today, I'm going to remind everybody what those principles are. All right. So let's get started with the warm-up exercises. Now, so with your feet shoulder width apart, you can stand up tall. Now, the first movement, you just interlace the fingers, palms facing up, and then you bring the arms up at about chest height. You turn them upward, and you just stretch. Breathe in. And then you can open the arms and then bring the arms back down with a bit of a sit back. And then you come back up again. Again, breathe in and breathe out. Now this movement, I might have mentioned earlier on that this is a very good go-to movement for you to do every now and then while you're sitting at your desk. So breathe in. It's not good to sit all day, as you know, so it's a simple exercise for you to remember, and every now and then you just want to stand up and stretch up. Breathe in as you stretch up, and slowly breathe out as you come back down. So every time when you come back down, you want to feel like you're sitting back a little, a tiny mini squat. One more time. This time you can also tilt your head so that you can look up to your hands. And then you look back and open your arms and bring them back down. Let's do that one last time. Breathe in. Look back to the front and breathe out. Okay. All right, now let's move on to the second warm-up movement. Now again, feet shoulder width apart. We're going to raise our arms sideways, slightly forward, all the way over our head or slightly in front, and then we turn the palms towards each other as we again sit down and bring the arms down. Again, you can build in breathing as well. Let's just stretch your arms up. You breathe in, turn the palms, fingers still facing upward, palms facing each other as you bring your arms down. Stretch out without raising your shoulders. Keep your body relaxed. Hold down. Feel like your body, your core is pulling your elbows down as you go down. Let's do that a couple more times. Stretch out but relax. Keep your elbows unlocked, elbow joints. Again. One last time. Okay. All right, now we're going to actually do some Tai Chi moves. If you remember, the first one we've learned before is cloud hands. All right, now let's go towards this direction. I'm going to step over a little bit. Let's do a few repetitions back and forth. All right, so we're going to step this direction. So with cloud hands, we're going to have this arm. I'm your mirror image, so that would be your right arm up. All right, the other arm, you just relax and place it slightly in front of the body. All right, now we're going to step with your right foot sideways. Now this time you want to squat down a little bit more, all right, than the previous warm-up movements. Switch the hands and step your left foot back. Then you move your weight to your left side, switch your hands, step your right foot. Now, last time we talked about the lower body, you want to have a slight turn to your right side when you reach there. And then you step back your left foot. And as you move your weight entirely to your left foot, you want to have the hip slightly turned to the left side. Switch hands. Step. Slightly turned. Switch hands. Step. Slightly turned. One last time towards this direction. Step. Slightly turn the hip, make sure that the hip joints are hinged. and then back. All right, now we're going to move towards back this direction. All right, so again, with this arm, your left arm would be the higher arm. So first step, left foot, move. Now in terms of the arms, you want to keep them in a semicircle. All right, so relax your shoulders, relax the elbow joints, round them. All right, keep them a little bit rounded. Move, switch hands, step, move your weight to your right. Switch hands, step to your left, move your weight to your left. Switch hands and step. Again, switch hands and step. One more time this direction and back. All right, one last time, we're gonna move that direction again. All right, so make sure your right hand is the higher one as you step your right foot. Switch hands and step. So hopefully this time by now, your legs are a little bit more strengthened, so we're gonna do more repetitions. So by doing this, when you're half squat, you don't have to go very low, but still you are strengthening your legs. All right, again, you want to make sure you're very steady and stable every time you take a step. All these weight transfers in control. One last time. Okay, all right. Now, the next movement that we have learned before is called the parting wild horse's mane. And as you remember, it requires us to do a bow step. Let's just practice the bow step to begin with. All right, let's go back this direction. If you remember, the bow step is one leg in front, one leg at the back. All right, let's just start with, you can, because we're gonna just focus on the footwork, so you can put your hands on your hip. You can turn your left toes to begin with, and then move the weight to your left side. And then you put the other foot forward, and then you move your weight mostly to the front. Make sure that you don't go overboard and push your knee far out, right? And then you want to take the next step. You sit back to free up the front toes. So you turn your right toes now outward to 45 degrees. Move your weight to your front foot as you put the other foot down and shift your weight there. Now with the bow step, the front toes are pointing forward, the back toes are pointing outward 45 degrees. Let's do that again. Sit back to turn the front toes. Move the weight to the front, and then put the other foot to the right foot forward, and then form a bow step again. Let's just do one more time. Sit back, turn, front toes, move the weight, left foot in front, and move the weight. All right, now let's go back. This time let's start with turning the right toes. Now last time we talked about the lower body. Again, we need to hinge at the hip joint. So you want to have the body slightly turned to the right side where your toes are pointing, to hip together with the shoulders. So you step. Now as you move your weight back to the front, you turn and square back to the front. Again, sit back to turn the front toes. Move the weight entirely to the left foot. Right heel, then move the weight. Again, turn. Move the weight, put the foot in front, and move. Couple more steps, sit back and turn. Turn the hip, turn the shoulders towards the left side, put the foot in front, and move. Again, sit back and turn. Now, when we first learned Tai Chi, we have a whole session, whole term of practicing footwork while we practice the movements. Let's do that one last time, going back this direction. And I'm gonna add the arms. This time I'm gonna start with the left side. Move entirely the weight on the left as you step. Now make sure that the 2 feet are not stepped on one line. You have to have the 2 feet slightly wider apart, about shoulder width apart. Which means now when you turn the right foot and step the left foot forward, don't step right in front of the right foot. Step a little bit to the side so that the 2 feet still form shoulder width apart. Again, sit back and turn. Move the weight. Slowly step out the right heel. Now again, don't put it right in front of the left foot. Put it a little bit sideways so that the 2 feet are shoulder width apart. Sit back and turn. Move the weight. Put the heel down. Are they wide enough? Move the weight. One last time. Sit back and turn. Slowly move the weight. Put the right heel down. Are they wide enough? And then shift weight. All right, now this time we're gonna add our arms. If you remember, starting wild horse's mane, whenever we have the weight on the left foot, we have a left hold ball, meaning the left arm is over the right arm, palms facing each other as if you're holding a ball. And then as you step, you're gonna open those arms diagonal. All right, so let's move back this direction. Okay. Again, we can start with turning to the right side. Now the weight is on the right, so we're gonna have a right hold ball, right arm over left arm. And then we step. As we move the weight to the front, we split the arms diagonally. Sit back and turn. Once our weight is on the left, we have a left hold ball. We step the right foot forward. As we move the weight and square the body, we split those arms. Again, sit back and turn. Make sure the arms are in a round shape. And the lower arm, in this case, the right arm is in front of the body, so you don't want to pull it back like that. One last time. Turn, left toe ball, step, and open. All right, now we're gonna practice this movement more later on as we add the new movement. All right, so no worries, we're gonna still practice this one. Now the new movement, I just wanna show you how it looks like. It's very simple, and we're gonna do it on both sides. It's a mirror image. There are actually two movements in there because there are two names for that. Now, first of all, let's say, you can just watch me first. Let's say I'm gonna start off with a parting wild horse's mane with the left foot in front and left arm in front. So what this movement looks like is that my back foot, I place it kind of halfway towards the left foot. We sit back onto the right side, and then we just turn the hands and put the left heel back down. Now this is called hands strumming lute. A lute is like a guitar, right? So when you play a guitar, usually we have the left hand higher. So that's how you remember that. All right, and then the other side would be exactly a mirror image. Let's just say we have a parting wild horse's mane with the right foot in front and right arm in front. So we do exactly the same thing. We take the back foot, step it halfway, sit back onto the back foot, and then raise the hands like that. So it's called raise hands, exactly the same mirror image. Now what it looks like on the side is that these two arms are stretched out in front of us, fingers pointing slightly upward. You don't want to stretch all the way, but you don't want to place it too close to the body. Still rounded, all right? And also when we sit on the one side, remember from last time, we're gonna have the body slightly turned towards that side of the hip and the shoulders. So naturally, this side of the arm would be slightly longer and in front of the other arm. All right, now let's do that together while I'm facing the mirror, the camera, so you can now do that as a mirror image. Now let's just start with the parting wild horse's mane with your left toes turned. With your weight on the left side, let's do a left toe ball, and you stepped out your right foot. And then you open your arms. All right, then the back foot goes up, half step. You sit back onto the back foot, now slightly turn towards your left side. And then as you place the right heel on the floor, you turn the hands up like this. Okay, don't worry about the names of the movements. All right, so let's just do that one more time. This time, the opposite side. This time you turn your right foot, move the weight onto the right. As you do a right whole ball, let's start with the parting wild horse's mane. You step out your left foot. As you move forward, your left arm goes in front, the right arm goes down. Now the back foot, which is your right foot, step halfway forward. Sometimes we call it a half step. You sit back onto your right side of the body, slightly turn to the right, and then put your left heel down, and you do change your palm shape so that the fingers are kind of pointing upward. And you stretch out your arms like that, palms towards each other. All right, let's do one more time on each side, and we'll practice together with the parting wild horse's mane sideways. One more time. This time you turn your left toes again. Left toe ball. Right foot. Parting wild horse's mane. The back foot half step forward. Sit back. And then place your hands in the correct position, placing your heel on the ground, the right heel on the ground. One more time on this side. Turning to your right whole ball. Heel in front. Move to a parting wild horse's mane. Back foot, step forward, sit back. And put your left heel down while you change the hand shape. Okay, now let's do that in a sequence. Let's do 3 parting wild horse's mane and then the handstrom loop or raised hand at the end. All right, so now let's start with turning to your right side, right foot, and then right whole ball. Left foot step forward, parting wild horse's mane. Let's just do 2 more parting wild horse's mane. Sit back and turn, left foot. Move the weight to the left, left whole ball. Step the right foot in front, heel down. Second parting wild horse's mane. Third one, sit back and turn your right foot. Right whole ball. Left foot in front. Parting wild horse's mane. Half step. Sit back. Put the hands in front and put the heel in front. One last time, going back. All right, so this time, left foot turn. Left toe ball. Right foot forward. Parting wild horse's mane. Turn the right foot. Move the weight, right whole ball, step the left foot. Parting wild horse's mane. One last time, sit back and turn. Left whole ball, move the weight to the left and right foot step forward. Parting wild horse's mane. And then half step, sit back, place the hands in front. All right. Hopefully everybody's following okay. And then now that we have a quick cool down move, we can finish the session. All right, so now stand with the shoulder width apart, feet to shoulder width apart, bring the hands up, breathe in, breathe out. And 2 more times like that. Just very relaxed, calming your breath. Breathe in. Breathe out. And one last time. Breathe in. right, so that's it for today. Okay, hope you're gonna have a good week ahead of you. Thank you.
And
I'll pass
thank
it
you,
back-
Charmaine.
Back to Lynn. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. It's great having you here. And thanks again. We will probably be doing one more webinar in June before we break for the summer. But our date's yet to be determined. So thanks to everyone who was able to stay, and we'll see you next time, hopefully.
All right, see you.
See you. Bye.